This is Hannibal back here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube, and we're also airing on Rick Bassman's YouTube channel today. He's still alive. He defeated cancer for I don't know how many times now, but he's helped start the developmental systems in wrestling, discovered Cena, the Ultimate Warrior, Sting, many more. Now he is involved with numerous projects, including autograph projects that are going to happen at WrestleCon this year at WrestleMania weekend in Las Vegas, which we're going to get into. None other than Rick Bassman. How are you today, sir? In beautiful San Fernando Valley, right?
Yeah, here in the San Fernando Valley in the Los Angeles area, Southern California. Beautiful day here at home, enjoying a nice sunny Sunday in the backyard with my five beautiful pit bulls. So life is good. And thanks for having me on, Devin. I've not done one of these in a long time. Just haven't really had a reason to or wanted to. But man, you're a friend. I always like talking with you. Um, in the interest of transparency, man, you got a big audience too. So if we're gonna do one, let's get the word out, whatever that word is.
Yeah, and what have you been up to lately? Because I know for a while you were working with TikTok, you were working with the United Wrestling Federation or United Wrestling Network, which I still think you have a little something to do with that championship wrestling from Hollywood here or there. But what have you been up to and what's going on with you moving forward for 2025?
All right, cool. So let's see. Let's do this quickly so I don't bore everybody right out of the gate in this interview. You mentioned TikTok thing. Maybe you meant Cameo, possibly. I was
Yeah,
running talent for a
Cameo.
while for
Sorry.
Cameo. And I'll come back to what I'm doing in a minute. The things like being involved with United Wrestling or whatever it is. Bottom line, Devin, I've been in and around pro wrestling for over 40 years now, and I'll always have my hand in some aspect of it just because I love it. And I want to be close to it and want to stay connected to it. And on that note, you'll hear a little bit about a project I am doing right now. But I like to think that, at my advanced age, which I don't even want to say, it kills me how old I got. I can't even believe it sometimes. I'd like to think that I maybe am finally approaching being a grown up. And on that note, I look about what's sustainable, what's gonna last for the future, what's gonna support me and the dogs that I have now, and God willing, the dogs to come. And I've been involved in the AI space for the past 3 years on a very, very high level. It's called generative AI, generative AI, which is the fancy term for deepfake, and running entertainment sports for Metaphysic and Music, which is the top deepfake company in the world. And I've done projects like bringing Elvis Presley back to life to perform on America's Got Talent. And that's one of many, many examples, projects with Eminem performing his current day self with his 20-year-old self side by side at the VMAs. The recent movie Here with Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis reunited, where Tom Hanks and Robin Wright are aged over a period of 70 years. So I work on both sides of those deals, meaning the buyer and then also the talent. So Elvis is a great example. I did the deal for Elvis with the Elvis Presley estate, and then did the deal with America's Got Talent to put Elvis on the show. Now, all that said, that's the thing that pays the bills, puts some money away, allows me to keep my hand in pro wrestling and mixed martial arts, and you continue to build a future. And along the lines of the whole philosophy of this AI deal that I've been in for the past 3 years, I'm building a food and beverage brand right now, ready for controversy number one, with Gabby Tuft, my dear, dear friend Gabby Tuft, formerly my equally good friend Tyler Rex. Most people in our industry know about that transition story. I have zero political viewpoint on it, by the way. Gabe was my friend. Gabby is my friend. Beyond that, though, we're building a food and beverage brand that we think is going to be one of the massive CPG success stories of the next 3, 4 years. CPG is just the industry term for consumer packaged goods. Energy drink, protein bar, ready to drink protein in a can, then also a bread and a dessert. So, that's my grown up stuff, man. Now that I've bored you to death with that, we can talk about fun rock and roll and pro wrestling and MMA shit. How's that?
Are you the one that got Gabby signed in the first place, when it was still Gabe Tough back,
Y-
in his
Yeah.
WWE days?
Yes. Over the years, in my tenure with WWF and then WWE later, and I always differentiate between the two based on the timelines. Um, I was responsible, in one degree or another, for delivering 43 talent to that company that signed a contract. And what I mean to one degree or another is I was like the final stopping place for people like Paul London and Brian Kendrick. But they didn't come to me until they were well trained. They just needed some repackaging, and they needed the vehicle to get in, because back in that day it was a very closed society. Now, if you have any kind of, well, WWE recruits now. It's a whole different world and different business. If you have talent, you're going to get seen. Back then, it was damn near impossible to get seen. I was one of the very few ways in. So guys like Luther Reigns, I mentioned London and Kendrick. There's others that I'm missing for sure. Samoa Joe. I'd be their last stop, and I'd be the one that would pull the levers to get the door open and get them in, and oftentimes do their first deal for them. In a case like Tyler Rex, Gabe Tuft, Gabe was really didn't even know what a pro wrestling ring was until he first stepped into my training facility in El Segundo. So trained him from the ground up, and then packaged him the way I knew how to put people together at that point, and still do. Put him in front of the powers that be, negotiated the deal, and off he went to Florida after hanging out and training a bit more at UPW. And that was my very last. You can't really formally call them graduating classes, but all at the same time, within the couple weeks of one another, were Tyler Rex, Ezekiel, and George Murdoch, Brodus Clay. So those were my last three big ones.
And Brodus ended up becoming probably the last really over NWA champion that Corgan had. And he interviewed, I know you don't like Trump, I don't think, but he interviewed Donald Trump too.
Dude, I don't say I like or don't like Trump or Biden or Harris
Yeah.
or whoever the hell else. It's like no one needs to hear my opinion on it. I have one, but I don't share it. You know, I'll tell you this much, Devin. I don't want to get too far off track, but the thing that really bothers me more than anything about politics, and I hate using canned words, but that word divisiveness that we hear so much these days. I mean, we're living in such a polarized society where there's like just so much hate out there that, people talk about making America great again. It'll probably sound really naive for me to say, I just want to see America nice again. A lot of people will laugh at that or sneer at that. But what I miss is just or what really bothers me is the continuing erosion of human decency. So that said, I love to escape, bringing it back full circle into the pro wrestling world, into the mixed martial arts world, and hang out with my friends and just be straight up and support one another and have a good time all at once. That's my goal.
A few people wanted me to ask you about this picture. This was right before any controversies happened, and you sent it to me when it happened. So I can tell you this was before anything came out about him, which a lot of it has died down now. And I think he's back even meeting with TKO people now. But are you allowed to say at all what that was about? Was there some sort of
Sure.
project in the works at the time?
Yeah, I think it would be fine now. Sure. The company I mentioned before, the AI company Metaphysic, developed a proprietary product called Metaphysic Pro. And what it is, it's a way, it's a system that affords the very best protection available in the world right now to safeguard your AI likeness and image out in the world. And we all know what a problem that is. And many of the girls we know from WWE have been victimized by deepfake porn, for instance. It's really like sad state of affairs. So Metaphysic, really smart move with Metaphysic Pro to help copyright, first of all, AI images, and then protect it and issue takedown orders. We were meeting with WWE about putting their entire roster into that program en masse. We were doing that with Kevin Dunn spearheading the program. Kevin is no longer with the company, so the project kind of died away with that. But I could see it coming back at another time. And smart move on WWE's part for sure to do that.
And now they have Cena doing his retirement run. I we won't get into the whole Cena thing, but the one
Thanks. Wait,
question
hold
I
on. I have to interrupt you. Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you. All right. Anyway, yeah, I don't like talking about John Cena, but go right ahead. You were saying?
I just wanted to ask, like, what caught your eye about him? Is there anything like because you got him signed extremely fast. I think he had what, 1 or 2 classes and he was signed. Was it just his body or was there
Well,
something else where you're like, this
it
guy's
was,
gonna
okay, so there's two questions there. There's a couple things, and I'll touch on that in a moment. It wasn't one or two classes. John was with me. I can't tell you exactly how long, but if I had to bet, I would say 7, 8, 9 months before he got signed. So if there's
oh,
some legend being spun out there that it was one or two classes, that is
there is.
diametric. The
There is.
absolutely, categorically, 100% untrue. So let me state that for the record now. Um, John, John was with me long enough that I actually remember when we changed him from a paying student to a scholarship student, meaning that he didn't have to pay it because I knew the guy would make it. It's like people over the years have said, "Oh, Rick, you have such a great eye for talent." And the thing is, with John Cena, you didn't have to be smart; anybody could have seen it. Um, John came with like so many natural gifts. First of all, his look, his physique. Obviously, guy's an absolute freak of nature in a way that very, very few people that's ever walked this planet have been. Um, and the guy can talk, man. I mean, he's got really, really good presence of mind. He can spin a promo on anything and any. We used to do a thing in promo class, Hannibal. It was really fun, where we had our hour over characters at that time, which were like Smelly, which is Mark Bell, and guys you wouldn't remember, Smooth Billy D, and Damian Steele, and Stars the Russian Nightmare. Back when we still had characters that you call the Russian Nightmare, and in promo class we would sometimes say, "Okay, John, who was a prototype, today you have to cut a promo about this match, whatever the circumstances are, but you have to cut it as Smooth Billy D." And Billy was a black guy who played like the Huggy Bear from Starsky and Hutch type. And John could nail any character, anytime, about anything. And then on top of that, dude, the guy had a work ethic that was like second to none. And that's incredibly important in this business. I saw some amazing talents come and go. Our Indian, who preceded the Ultimate Warrior and Power Team USA, being a great example, saw some amazing, amazing prospects come in, but they just couldn't do the work. So, John, the looks, the physique, the work ethic, the ability to promo. Again, not my special eye for talent. Any knucklehead would have seen it.
And we talked about your relationship with Vince McMahon. There's some rumors that he might actually open another wrestling company with Shane. Start something off with Shane to eventually take over. I know you have a history of working with Shane, particularly when there was some talk of the McMahons buying Pride. Could you
Oh yeah,
share that
yeah, yeah,
story?
yeah. Sure. First of all, you obviously have heard more about this than I have. If I would love to see what Vince and Shane are going to do if they're truly going to do this. I've always this might be skirting the bound of political correctness, but I've always liked both guys. I have my ups and downs with Vince over the years. I think anybody closely connected to him would probably say the same thing. But at the end of the day, he's been good to me. I like the guy. I like Shane. They're easy to talk to. I don't pass judgment on what he's accused of, other to say if it's true, it's awful and horrific. Um, but I want to believe that it's not. I don't have a comment on whether it is or not. But all in all, good dude, good to me. And obviously, I don't need to talk about how smart or successful he is because the world knows that. Um, with Shane, younger version of Vince, a little happier go lucky than Vince is, I think. Huge mixed martial arts fan, Shane, massive fan. And I got a call. I'm not good at years, Devin, but I want to say 2007 maybe, and I could be off by a year, maybe even two. And it was John Laurinaitis, who was the head of talent relations at that time, saying, "Hey Rick, you always want to try to do the Johnny Ace voice whenever we talk about John, right? Can you do the Johnny Ace voice, Hannibal?"
No, I can't. But if anyone could, it should be you with all the contact you had with him over the years.
I can't do impressions to save my life. He'd be like, "Hey
Oh, do
Rick,
you? I gotta ask you, do you have, and I don't mean to digress, but do you have the same view about Johnny Ace and his accusations as Vince?
nothing. I don't know anything about it. You know what? I know what I read in the in Meltzer's and Alvarez's sheet, and that's it. Nothing more. So
All right, thank
uh,
you, Rick. I appreciate it.
that was good. Way better than I could do. So so Johnny called me one day. Says, "Hey Rick, Vince is seriously thinking about getting into the MMA business." Now, the reason they called me Hannibal is, it's a different era. Pro wrestling and MMA definitely had its, fair share of crossover activity in Japan, but it had not crossed over to the USA really at all yet, other than Ken Shamrock fighting at UFC. But people even then did not know Ken had a pro wrestling background in Japan. And Eric Bischoff might dispute this, and Eric is a friend, so this is not an argument or debate or a challenge, but I was very much the bridge, more so than anybody else in the early days, between pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. And what I mean by that is, it's obviously fairly high profile in pro wrestling with my school and my promotion and, the documentaries and whatnot with my company, UPW. And I started a company in 99. First of all, opened a gym called Extreme University, which was the first open to the public mixed martial arts gym in California. And the reason I emphasize open to the public is obviously Lions Den, Ken Shamrock's preceded mine. But I had a school for mixed martial arts, but we put a pro wrestling ring in the school, and that's where we started the first Ultimate University for the UPW promotion. Now, in starting this, I ended up very quickly managing some of the top heavyweights in UFC at that time, namely Mark Coleman, first heavyweight champion ever, Mark Kerr, who is being played by The Rock in the upcoming movie Smashing Machine, Tank Abbott, Ola Taktarov, Marco Hua, Stan Severin, Don Fry, Chemo, a lot of the early era icons. And I was well known for that within pro wrestling circles. And I was also traveling to Japan a lot with guys like Butterbean, or who I'd booked to fight at Pride, fight at K1, crossed over Sylvester Turkai and Tom Howard and Sean O'Hare and Nathan Jones to bring them there to fight. So a long precursor to say this. Johnny calls me and says, Rick, Vince is thinking of getting into MMA. We'd like to fly you out to Stanford to spend a couple days with us with all the company leadership across like every division to talk about helping us to formulate a plan to get into the business. Like, great. So turned out being a pretty good gig. They flew me once a month. They paid me a pretty nice fee each time I went. They'd fly me first. That's how they take care of you. Pick you up at the car in the airport, check you in a nice hotel, send the car to bring you to Titan Towers, which was called back in those days. And I spent almost a year, one time a month, architecting a business plan for WWF to get into the business and compete against UFC, which they positively, in my opinion, could have done at that time. Um, it came up somewhere during the process. Shane sat in, if not all the meetings, and he may have at least most of them, and was as much a contributor to it as I was, and very, very smart about how mixed martial arts works. That Shane had a different philosophy than Vince and I had. And I'm curious to get your opinion on this, and anybody's opinion who wants to comment. Shane was a purist. Shane was all about who the best fighter and what the best fights were. And you would think that's almost like duh, logically, right? But you got to think what was working in mixed martial arts at that time. Who were the guys that stood out? Well, there are guys like Chemo, the guys like Tank Abbott, characters, guys that really looked the part. Who I'd already mentioned, like Mark Coleman and Ken Shamrock, guys also like Gary Goodridge and Brian Johnston, and on and on. And to me, and to Vince, mixed martial arts at that point, if it was going to work in the U.S., would have been more about the characters. And my argument was, guys, and I'm sorry, let me back up. Shane wanted to buy Pride. This has been publicized a bunch of times. Pride was for sale at that point. Nobuhiko Sakakibara was the owner of, or the figurehead or primary shareholder in Pride. Was a friend of mine then, is a friend of mine now. He's back with Ryzen these days. And I bridged the gap to start discussions between Pride and WWF because Pride indeed was for sale at that time. It was like right at the beginning of the big Yakuza scandal over there, where it broke that the sport was pretty much run by organized crime and business was starting to decline largely because the networks were pulling out and sponsors were pulling out. Company was for sale. It wasn't terribly expensive, but I said to Shane one day, I go, why would you buy it? Why do you want to buy Pride as opposed to just start our own fresh? He goes, well, two reasons. He goes, the library, which I thought was valid. You know, there's some great fights. Not that the world really knew who these guys were, just the hardcore fans. And again, Devin, mixed martial arts was very, very niche at that point. It was not in the vernacular. There was not one single fighter, even a Hoist Gracie, that more than one person on the streets would have heard of back in those days. There was certainly no Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor or anything of that sort, or John Jones. Uh, so it's this tiny sport, and the awareness of it were for people that were hardcore fans. So Shane says the library. Okay, got that. There's some value there. And he goes, in the fighters. We want the fighters. And I said, who? And he goes, well, we want Fedor, of course. And we want Dignog, Nagara. He goes, we want Krokop. I go, okay, Krokop. I could see you know Mirko Krokop, right, Devin?
Yeah, he looks kind of like Lance Storm.
Yeah, but probably a bigger, more jacked up, better looking version, I would dare
Yeah.
say. So, Crow Cop to me could have been a WWF guy, WWE guy, had he done that kind of training. He had that look, he carried himself like that. And I'm like, Shane, I go, I think it's a mistake. So Fedor, and I love Fedor. Boy, I admire Fedor. I mean, he might be the best heavyweight of all time. That's another debate for another time. Um, but like, dude, he doesn't. No one knows who Fedor is. He's like, what do you mean no one knows? He's the best heavyweight in the world. I go, I know, but the people that know that are the hardcores that follow it. I go, here's what happens. If you assume Fedor's contract, you're paying. First of all, there's Krokop. Yes, great look at the time, and that's not even one of his better photos. Um, guy like Fedor, and again, only props for him. And this is not meant for me to be political or sound like I'm trying to take care of both sides. The best ever, but he had no look. Matter of fact, he had like almost an anti look. I always joked about he looked like someone slightly overweight accountant. I always called Fedor that. And that was a time when he could dominate and beat anybody in the world. But A, he would have been expensive. B, in my mind, he was not marketable to the U.S. audience. And C, it's going to quickly show there's a handful of fighters in the world who are really good, and then lots of handfuls who aren't. So I go, let's try an experiment. So I brought two photos to the office. I brought an 8 by 10 of Fedor and an 8 by 10 of Maverick von Haug. Do you know Maverick, Hannibal?
I do not know.
You look him up, Maverick von Haug, known as the Soul Collector. And he was a guy that was fighting in the underground shows in LA, which was a real thing. Back before UFC ever did a show way before UFC did a show in California. And the guy built a bit of a street legend for himself, did a lot of cool things throughout the years, but never like broke into the mainstream in any meaningful way. But Maverick looks like, I mean, if you find a photo and post it for the show, you'll see what I mean. He looks like he walked out of the pages of a supervillain comic or the cover of a supervillain comic. And I took these 8 by 10s. I said, Shane, let's go talk to your dad, or Vince. He always said Vince. But don't
Is
say
this
anything.
him here?
Yeah, that's Maverick. Yeah. That's
That's
not a
good.
good photo of him either. He's very, very theatrical guy.
He looks straight out of jail. He looks straight out of the prison yard.
Yeah, but he's actually a good looking guy. He's super smart and articulate and just a great character. Like knows how to wear a suit, everything you want for like your top guy, one of your top guys. So we brought 8 by 10s into Vince's office of Fedor and of Maverick, set them down side by side on the desk. And I said, Vince, which one of these guys do you want for the new MMA company? And you know who he said, of course, right? Come on.
Maverick.
Of
Maverick.
course. Of course. There
Yeah.
was zero hesitation. None. He didn't know he
Yeah.
wasn't not a fan of MMA, so he didn't know Fedor. Again, most
Right.
people in the world at that point didn't. And I'm
And
like,
a lot of them still don't, to be honest with you. If you're like, you ask your normal person on the street, they still don't. Is this Maverick here?
that is also Maverick, yes.
Yeah.
But you're still not finding like the super like comic book hero
Yeah.
photos of him, but that's okay. Um Anyway, the point was, hey, Fedor right now is going to cost you, 100 grand plus for a fight, which at that time was a lot of money. Maverick's going to be 5 grand at that point. And Maverick, you're going to be able to match with thousands of different guys and have good fights. You can't do that with Fedor. I go, we should build this company around guys like Maverick. And who cares if they're, and I'm not saying this about Maverick either, he's a really close friend of mine, but let's say, as opposed to A plus level, let's call them B level fighters. I go, let's get 1,000 guys like this that are all at that level because the audience still is not discerning enough to know the difference, and that's how we build our promotion. And Vince goes, absolutely. So that's why the Pride deal went away.
Very interesting. Well, you said you think it might be a good idea for that to happen. I mean, we've heard that to avoid this happening, TKO might put Vince in charge of the boxing division or
Mm.
give him some good job in the Saudi Arabia Boxing Commission. But from your knowledge of Vince, do you think it's out of the question? He's too old. He just is going to fade away into the limelight, into the obscurity. Like, or do you
You
think
know
there might be a bit of fire left in him? Like, I'm not going out like this, and I want to leave something to Shane, because I hear Stephanie and Shane, it's not always roses.
that last the first photo you put up of me and Vince together, that was less than 2 years ago. That was at headquarters in Stamford, and he was, to my estimation, as sharp as ever. We were in that meeting with Brad Bloom and Nick Kahn and Kevin Dunn and a couple of others, and Vince ran the whole thing. And the guy's as spot on as ever. And unless something has radically changed between now and then, it I couldn't think of one good reason why he couldn't sit at the top of a boxing promotion that's going to be the top boxing promotion in the world. Absolutely, why not? Again, if he gets past this case, and I would love to see it. I mean, I wish nothing but well to Vince and the woman. I think her name is Janelle Grant. Um, but I hope they both can get this solved amicably and wipe the slate as clean as possible. And I'm not, again, if you know, assuming that the accusations are not accurate, I don't know. I would love to see Vince have a run at the top again, Hannibal. I think it'd be great. In my time with Metaphysic, in working with some of the top musical artists in the world, I'd probably call him a close friend at this point. His name is Marty Ehrlichman, and Marty has been Barbara Streisand's manager for almost 65 years, if you can believe that. And Marty recently had his 95th birthday, and the guy is on the freaking phone doing deals all day long, every day. So, we can all only hope for that. And hey, Vince is not even close to 95, right? So who knows?
And as far as MMA goes, at what point did you go from managing wrestlers to managing MMA guys like Tank Abbott and Mark Coleman?
Uh, a kind of a fairly typical story, because all the early MMA managers, or the vast majority of them, were gym owners. And these guys are training in their gyms, and you have that daily connection. So one thing leads to another. Now, I can tell you this also categorically: being a gym owner or manager does not qualify you to manage contract talent for a fight organization, but it's just how it worked back then. And I had my wrestling promotion. I was a business guy. I managed wrestlers forever. You brought up Sting and Warrior, and guys whose contracts I had done for years included people like Rey Mysterio and Conan for WCW. So I was like very well versed in that world. And my wrestling company was doing so well with the school and the company both that we opened a second location for our school in Los Angeles, in El Segundo. And we went into a partnership with Raw, a guy named Rico Chiapparelli, which was the first manager of Randy Couture and a whole bunch of other notable guys. And Rico said to me one day, he goes, "Hey, Rick." Rico was the owner of Raw. He was not really a business guy, super smart in his own right, but low key and not the kind of guy you think you'd find doing deals and whatnot, although he certainly could. Um, he goes, "Hey, Rick, I know what you do in wrestling." He goes, "I've got these two guys that I'm managing in mixed martial arts, and they're top guys, but they are freaking driving me crazy, and I cannot deal with them anymore. And I'm wondering if, like, you might be interested in getting into this world." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So it turned out being Mark Coleman and Mark Kerr when they were the two top heavyweights in the world. So that's where I started. And, it was a natural segue. The mechanism for for fighting MMA and for pro wrestling, apart from the fact that pro wrestling, if you're with a big company back then, you're working under contract. Mixed martial arts, you were just going fight to fight or maybe 2 3 fight deal. Apart from that, the complexion of the two is very very similar. So it was an easy transition. And then my next client was Oleg Taktarov, who was one of the early legends and icons. And while I was doing Oleg's deals, there was a Robert De Niro movie casting called 15 Minutes, and they needed a lead villain who was Russian, and I submitted Oleg for it. And after a long go round, we got him into that movie. He had a big part with De Niro in his in Oleg's first feature film, and that opened the floodgates very very quickly to the movie and TV and commercial bookings for the fighters and the wrestlers both, which I'm still doing actively to these days. Just put Rikishi into a new TV series that's starring Nicole Kidman, believe it or not. So still doing a lot of those deals.
Very interesting. Were you responsible for Nathan Jones's acting jobs as well?
Only some of them. I did not do the Troy deal. That preceded my time with Nathan. The ones that I did for Nathan were Mad Max, Charlie's Farm, and then a bunch of little odds and ends movies, which names I really can't even remember right now. Like I remember being a big part of casting some movies for Mike Leader, and Mike is like a legend. He's an English guy, but he's a legend in Japan and China for producing martial arts films. And we did a lot where we had put multiple guys into the same movie. So I remember like this one fight scene with Nathan Jones and Luther Reigns on Tom Howard and Sylvester Turkai, where I would do all the bookings for that sort of thing.
Did you have anything to do with the casting of Nacho Libre
Casting, oh, you know what?
or
Yeah, we did.
feeding them? Because
No,
I
no,
think they use some of the guys that you're
yeah.
associated with.
It's so funny, Devin. There's been so much time and so much time's gone by, so many deals done, so many brain cells lost along the way that I oftentimes just don't remember things. And I think I function pretty well, but maybe it's just the volume of things where I can't keep a grip on all of it. But now that you mention it, my inclination was to say no. We trained Jack Black for the movie, and Tom Howard was a hands-on trainer for that. I did that deal. Um, but I forgot until this very moment that yeah, we cast most of the wrestlers for that movie too. Yes.
As far as MMA, you talk about how you've been involved with it really since the early 90s, almost starting a competitive league to UFC with WWE. What do you think of how the MMA industry has evolved since its beginnings, and what role have you actually played in that?
Um, how it's evolved. Wow. I mean, where to start? That's a whole separate show. Uh, in my mind, it was never a sideshow because there's a real storied history of it in places like Japan and Brazil with luta livre and whatnot. Um, I've always thought it was the purest form of sport and the most attractive form. I mean by attractive, a lot of people find it brutal, but end of day, people want to see a contest between man and man, and as it were now, women and women, because women's MMA in my mind is just as dynamic now as the men's. Um, but in the U.S., it was a sideshow. It was just like it was this aberration that was an early hit on pay per view, then got banned for one reason or another. Again, we don't have to get into that today. And then it went away. And Dana had the foresight to see what it could be, and the guy created a worldwide, what's become a worldwide phenomenon, one of the biggest and continually fastest growing sports in the world. So, circus to major player in the space of 20, 30 years now. So hats off to everybody who's had a hand in it. As far as my hand in it goes, I mean, I'm a bit player. There were lots of us. There weren't a lot in the beginning, but some of the distinctions though that stand out in my mind. Again, first MMA gym open to the public in California, under my fighting brand, Valor Fighting, it was called. And Ken Shamrock has now adopted that name for his bare knuckle promotion. But Eddie Millis and I had Valor Fighting back in 1998. Um, Produced and promoted the first ever show in California under a state of California Athletic Commission license before UFC even did their first show in California. So little firsts like that, but it can't take a lot of credit or any credit for that matter in making the imprint that it's made now.
You're probably the best guy to ask this. How do you think Haku would have done in MMA?
It's an impossible question to answer, and here's why. Okay, let's if you really broke down the ingredients you need to be a successful fighter at the top level, you need an innate toughness for sure, and that's something you're born with. Okay, so we all know that Haku's an A plus there. There's no debate about that at all. The other big, and there's a lot of things that go into it, but the other big one is you have to be able to execute the skill set that comes with it. And that's stuff that is learned over a period of time. You want to have the instinct, which he had, but then you need to learn and you need to like hone that instinct. And that's why it's impossible to answer. We don't know if he could have done that. Now, if he had, then he would have been competitive with the best, I think. But it's a giant if. We'll never know.
And Brendan wants to know your thoughts on wrestlers going into MMA and vice versa. You have a lot of experience in that, the good and the bad.
I mean, absolutely. Why not? In the early days, I crossed more guys over, I think, from wrestling to fighting and fighting to wrestling both than anybody else did. And I thought it always made sense because, again, even though, pro wrestling is, what's the best word to use these days? It's a construct, it's staged, it's a show, whatever you want to call it. Again, we can never take away from the, how hard it is on the body and the pure athleticism, but it's an art form, entertainment form, and mixed martial arts is an athletic contest and a fight. But apart from that primary difference, Devin, I mean, to me, the two sports have always been identical. It's about, packaging yourself to be a commodity that the fans want to pay to see. And you can't say that about hockey players or football players who live under a helmet on the field. Um, Even basketball players, they don't package or promote themselves the same way. And if you have that skill, you have that look, you have that mindset, and you have the toughness and the ability to do both. Absolutely. I mean, find your best place in both. Matt Riddle's probably a good example of that. Although he could have gone farther in mixed martial arts, I think, had he given himself the chance. But no reason for people. Well, the big reason not to do both is they're both incredibly hard on the body, and anybody that can succeed at both, like Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, are true exceptional freaks of nature. But why not? More power to them. Anybody that wants to try both.
I think you managed Tito Ortiz for a while. He had a very public WWE tryout a few years ago where he was really promoting that he was going through the process. Nothing ever came out of it. If you ask a guy like Tank Abbott what happened, he'll say he sucked. Do you have any insight on the real reason there? Is it financials?
What does Tank say?
He said Tito sucked. That's the reason why he never went in.
That's a vintage Tank right there. You know Tank pretty well, right, Hannibal?
Yes, thanks to you. You're the one that I think first introduced us, but
Oh, did I?
I'd say he's a
I didn't
friend of
remember that.
mine. He's probably going to watch this, by the way, so we
Uh,
won't insult him. He's one of
Good,
your
but no,
guys.
but here's why I brought him up. Um, Tank, and I have a couple of pages I wrote about him for my book, and it's in that section, the good, the bad, and the ugly of pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. And Tank is on my good side. He's on my good page, man. The Tank is like so misunderstood, and the reason I asked if you knew him well is then you'll be able to support the following statement. That guy is a freaking intelligent guy, man. Super articulate, very funny, really funny guy. But so that's why when you say Tank commented on Tito by saying Tito sucks, that would probably fulfill most people's vision of what they think Tank is. A guy that probably couldn't manage more than two words in a sentence. But boy, the truth couldn't be further from that. Anyway, I just wanted to comment on that.
But
Um,
do you think it was more of a money thing? Because I don't
yeah,
know what.
no,
Yeah.
I know what it was. Yeah, I'll answer the question. Yeah, I did the introductions between Tito and Vince back at that time. Tito was on top of the world. Vince was interested. It was a combination of money and Tito's schedule. And, WW, it was still F at that time. They just weren't opening their pocketbooks the way they are now. And Tito was one of the highest paid MMA fighters in the world at that point. He was parlaying that into opportunities outside of the cage, and it just didn't make a lot of fiscal sense for him at that point to take the deal. And the proposition was, of course, well, the what we're offering as a guarantee is just your downside. And those of us in the business and fans of the business know what that means. Where you could earn, multiples if you get over, if you get the push and your push sticks, you can earn multiples of what your downside is. But Tito just wasn't willing to roll the dice on that. Was that a mistake? I don't know. I think he could have been very successful, but again, one of those things we'll never know.
Someone on here was asking if you know if it's true or not about them being interested for Kurt Angle to cross over to UFC at one point. Was that just rumor or was there truth to that?
100% true. Absolutely true at that point. And it was an early enough era that Kurt, like Mark Schultz, if you remember Mark's one match in mixed martial arts, um, Kurt probably would have had some pretty big success right out of the gate. But Kurt was a guy who was always, very business minded. Not saying that Tito wasn't, or nobody else that we're talking about wasn't, but Kurt was very business minded. He was already getting over in WWE at that time, WWF. He understood from being on the road and seeing it happen how downsides paid out at a level way beyond the downside. He'd had the recurrent neck problems. And if I'm Kurt at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm making this, but I think I'm going to make that at WWF. I always have the broken neck in the back of my mind, and you start to weigh all the factors. I think he made the right call staying where he stayed. And then, well, it's not only my opinion. I think history would agree with me on that one.
And I'm not actually going to ask you this question, but weirdest question ever. What were you doing from the year 87 to 93? I don't think we have time to get into everything Rick has done in those years because he's lived a hell of a life. Hopefully, he'll put that book out one day. Any update on that book?
No, and I got very into it. Just over a year ago, hired an editor to give it a big pass. It's all shaped up, and my only answer to that, Devin, is going to sound like I'm just being evasive, is that life is good now and life's busy. Um, as you know, last year I had a brain cancer battle, and then the radiation fallout from that was like hell on earth, and there's always something that seems like it's a choice for me, but I choose to put my attention in a different place. And I would love to get the book out at one point. My concern now, maybe even fear, might be a strong word, is that it might be a little outdated in terms of how it's written because the vernacular has changed so much. But it's a matter of timing. I'd like to think one day I'll say, okay, now I'm going to focus on it, because when I put it out, if I put it out, this is going to sound a little arrogant, but I'll say it. I think the book is really good, and I think it has a chance, if promoted properly and managed properly, to be very successful. Um, when I had my deal with Simon Schuster when I first wrote the book, this was in 2011. And I eventually was able to. I had to give them back the advance, so I was able to cancel the contract. It became apparent to me that they were going to market it as a pro wrestling slash MMA memoir, and my book is written in 9 chapters, and each one is meant to be symbolic of like a life lived and died, essentially. And pro wrestling is like an eighth of the book. Um, so I'm like, it doesn't make sense to market it that way. It's like, yeah, but the market's hot. And and I remember saying this, and there's all respect to Chuck Liddell and to Rey Mysterio with the following example, because their books were both big hits right around the same time. I'm like, well, first of all, Rey Mysterio is a 100 times bigger name than I am in pro wrestling. Chuck Liddell is 100 times bigger name than I am in mixed martial arts. So it doesn't make sense to market it only that way when there's only an eighth of the book. And I go, guys, and the other thing is, my book's way better than theirs. It's more interesting. Even if you're a wrestling fan or a fighting fan, by all means, you want to read raised in Chuck's books, but my book's about life, and I just wanted to have a chance to hopefully succeed on those merits and not be stuck in the bargain basement pro wrestling bin.
And it's also about gonna be about overcoming addiction too, which you had a whole Talking Tough podcast at one point, trying to help motivate people to overcome demons, which are in entertainment in general, right?
Yeah, and for me, I'm not an AA guy or an NA guy. I've never been that, and it didn't appeal to me. Although I see the value for many people that I know that are in that. Um, but if you're in those groups, what I'm going to say is now going to sound like denial. Addiction never played a huge part in my life. I definitely have an addictive personality. I'll cop to that. And I had my go around with substances throughout the years. When I had my surgeries, 2013 to 2016, I absolutely lived on narcotic pain pills and vodka and Red Bull. I don't recommend that combination to anybody, by the way. Um, but I was never an out of control druggie. And I went to rehab, Devin, and I swear to God, here's the part that really sounds like denial. I didn't go to rehab to get off of drugs. I went to rehab because I got so injured and so depressed and then so broke because of all the circumstances that mounted, I had nowhere to live. So I went to rehab to have a roof over mine and my dog's heads, if you can imagine that. And I selected the rehab I went to entirely on the basis of which rehab would allow a guy with three pit bulls to live under their roof.
And that's of course because WWE, you used to work for them, right? So you were covered under their program?
I did, and I believe I was the first non, what do you call in ring or non in ring performer that they availed of that benefit, and it was just they didn't have to do it. There was zero obligation to do it, but they did it, and they were super great about it, and I'll always be appreciative of that, of course.
Did you have issues with recreational stuff too, or was it more I know you use them like all of us in the wrestling business
I don't
from
know.
from
I don't know what you're talking about, man. I have no idea. No,
yeah,
go
but I
on.
know like it doesn't seem like you because I know you still have alcohol here and there and like it's not a problem for you. Was drugs like that? Like if they're around, you do them, but you were not like someone that would sit in their house and do drugs on their own
No,
necessarily.
I was not the latter. No, that never had any appeal to me. What I do enjoy, I still drink wine almost nightly. I don't have a glass. If it's like a big night and I'm with a friend, maybe two. Um, but and that's it. Um, but if I'm home, like I call it like my I'll, it's pretty funny. I'll light candles. I always have fresh flowers in my place. I put the fireplace on, put some nice music on, pour a glass of wine, and cuddle with my pit bulls. So I will do that without company, but that's about as far.
They
I've,
got
uh,
fireplaces in the San Fernando Valley.
it gets cold in the winter at nighttime here, man. Yes. Yeah, I'll give you a tour in a minute if you want to see it. But we love our house here, me and my dogs. But it's like uh, when you say I forget the word was the recreational use. Anyway, so my first big run ever in business, and I'll do this one quickly too, was 1980 to 85, and I built what I used to call a mini rock and roll empire in Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Ventura counties. And I owned two nightclubs and a limousine and a modeling agency, and I was promoting concerts under my name, Bassman Productions, with the biggest artists of the day back. That's like when new wave, if you're even old enough to remember that term, was the thing.
Oh, I like new wave music actually still to this day.
Right. So I was doing like Bassman Productions presents the B-52s, the Talking Heads, the Police, the Go-Go's, the Clash, and on and on. So bottom line is, I was 20 years old to 25 years old. It's the early 80s, which was the time when they coined that whole phrase, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I had all like the accoutrements, right? The limo and the nightclubs and the concerts. So cocaine was a pretty big thing, and alcohol. But the thing was, I don't know if it's a mitigating factor or a bad excuse. I would drink and do coke almost nightly, And then I'd be up at 7 a.m. the next morning, and I'd put in a 14-hour workday without fail. So that was life back in those days.
How did you go to sleep?
Dude, you know what's so funny? Even now, that I wouldn't. Dude, if I looked at cocaine, I'd probably have a heart attack right now. But I can drink a big, strong coffee right now and fall asleep immediately. I don't know. That's just, I've had my share of downfalls and bad luck in my lifetime, but being able to sleep's never been one of them, thankfully.
Yeah, well, that's a good talent because that's the bad part about that drug. You could, if you're someone with a different personality like some of us, you can be up for days at a time, and it just becomes miserable.
Oh yeah, dude, that never had any appeal to me whatsoever. I never got that whole 3-day binger thing. No thanks, man. Not for me.
So you actually won an Emmy at one point when you were working for Disney, and I think you were the first person during that time to ever put on a wrestling event at a theme park. Is that true? Because a lot of people will give that other guy in Florida at Universal Studios credit for bringing wrestling to theme parks, Eddie Mansfield, but it
Eddie,
was
right?
you, right?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let me clear that up too, because I know not that it's a big subject of discussion, but I did see an article not long ago about wrestling and theme parks. So yeah, I was actually responsible for the first pro wrestling event ever at both the Walt Disney Company and at Universal. And by responsible for, what I mean is I had a job in those days. I was employed by the Walt Disney Company, although I was moonlighting as the evil heel manager Rick Golden at the time for Herb Abrams UWF. There's a whole nother story. Oh my God. But as a Disney employee, everything, Devin, everything I do in my life always comes back to pro wrestling. Like with the AI gig, doing a deal with WWE. Hopefully, there's always pro wrestling involved in everything I do. It seems like I can't escape it. I don't want to escape it. So in in Orlando, when I was at Disney there, I was running a property called Pleasure Island. It was Disney's nighttime entertainment complex. It's a super cool place. If you can imagine Disney in the nightclub business, there was a 7-acre island that Disney created with two stages on either end for live music and whatnot. And we bring big names in to play there that I would book. There were also 6 nightclubs, like a country western club, a comedy club, a new wave club, stuff like that. So there was a club there called Zephyrs Rock and Roll Roller Skating and Beach Club. I kid you not. I don't know who named that thing. And it was 3 floors, but you could look off the top 2 floors down onto the bottom floor. And I'm like, man, it'd be really cool to put a wrestling show on here. So I ran it up the flagpole. A lot of the people at Disney weren't psyched about it, but I was pretty much able to left to my own devices, so I could kind of do what I wanted. And I started hunting around for who made sense. And I connected with a old friend at that time, Rob Russin. Rob had a little promotion called IWA, and I made a deal with Rob, and Rob brought an IWA show into Zephyr's Rock and Roll Roller Skating Beach Club at Pleasure Island on Walt Disney property. So it was the first ever pro wrestling event on a Disney property. Ivan Koloff and Kevin Von Erich were on the card. I remember that. And then right after that, pretty much every other promoter started calling. It was like, oh my God, Disney's letting wrestling in. Herb Abrams was one of the guys that had reached out. I had known Herb years before. He, at this time, as you know, was like buying up all the recently released WWF stars, so it was a more attractive option. Started working on a deal with Herb. The deal went south right pretty close before showtime, but I didn't want to see Herb get hurt. So I called my counterpart, Molly Miles, over at Universal Studios and was able to move that show over there. So that's my hand on the Universal side of things.
Very interesting. You've definitely done it all. And what you're doing next is going into the autograph domain, at least for WrestleMania weekend,
Yeah.
April
I don't
17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th.
yeah. Yeah, at WrestleCon, yeah. I don't know if I want to call it going into the autograph business. I mean, I have a lot of friends in that business, and I'll help connect people. There you go, the combat icons. This is why I'm doing this. And what you're saying. Um, in addition to having managed most of the top heavyweights from the early era, I've always just been a huge fan of that era. And to me, these are the guys, on which the business was built on their backs in my mind. These are the first stars They're the ones that launched UFC upon the world, and I always am looking for vehicles to like put a bunch of them together to do something cool. So WrestleCon's coming up. It's in Vegas. Butterbean, who's one of my best friends on planet Earth, he and I have been talking for a year now about this, what we're calling the MMA icons. You know, Bean has a bit of MMA experience, which some people don't know about. But we widened it. I said, Bean, why don't we partner up? Let's bring some of the boys in. Let's change it from MMA to combat. That way, open it to boxers or amateur wrestlers, whoever has the right name, and let's just put a group together and do appearances and Q and A's and photos and autographs. So that's really all that is. We've got a great buzz on it. We're getting a ton of business already for pre-sales on the group photos. Personally, I'm just excited to like reunite with all my old friends at one time in one place and do some cool stuff.
Are you going to have extra security there with Fry right there with Tank Abbott?
Yes, and I booked extra security, and their names are Dan Severin and Butterbean and Mark Kerr and Josh Barnett.
Do you have any update for us on how that Rock movie went? Because I guess the filming's over now with for Mark Kerr's Smashing Machine.
Yeah, the only updates I have are from Mark himself, who obviously is like over the moon about it. I mean, great opportunity for Mark at this time in his life, in his career, and he's about as far away from the guy you saw on the Smashing Machine as you could possibly imagine. Mark's doing great in life. You know, it's funny. It seems to me like guys who had a really really big downfall. Like myself, like Mark, suddenly you hear about something like this movie where the biggest star in the world is playing you, and it's like, oh my God, you came back from nowhere, and now look at this. But it never really works that way in my experience, Devin. It's more like you got your shit back together to one degree, at least, or another, and you start to build opportunities, and then you build on that to the big opportunity. And this thing came to Mark at a great time in his life when he's like physically and mentally and emotionally and financially stable and really ready to capitalize on it. So Mark's told me a lot about the shooting process, about his relationship with Dwayne, with Emily Blunt, with the director, and he just couldn't be more psyched about it. He also sent me a bunch of photos, which I'm not allowed to share, um, but from the set. And he's got like this great one of him standing with Dwayne actually in makeup as Mark. It's very surreal. Um, and it sounds like it's going to be a good one. I mean, the director is top notch. I saw the script. The script is great. Looking forward to, like a lot of other fans, which I am. I'm a fan. Looking forward to seeing it come out.
Did you ever come across Dwayne in your years working with WWE?
A little here and there, only because when I was really active was when he was coming up, and I don't really have any rock stories. My my only one really, and I wouldn't even call it a story, but I'll tell you, is that it's when they booked the Hogan versus Rock main event for Mania, and Rock had been gone for a while. So someone called me. I think it was Johnny. It may have been Jr. It may have been Bruce Pritchard. I'm not sure. Um, but they said, hey, Rock's coming back to Maine with Hulk at Mania, and he's got ring rust on him, and can we send him by your school to do some work? I'm like, yeah, of course. So I remember gathering up all of our instructors, which were Tom Howard and Aaron Aguilera and the Ballad Brothers. Um, may have been Kevin Quinn, may have been Mike Bell. I'm not sure on the latter two. May have been Chris Daniels, may have been Frankie Kazarian. I'm not trying to drop names. These are who the instructors were. And The Rock came by, and I had never really paid that much attention to his work. And in the ring, like up close from a couple of feet away, I'm like, fuck, that guy is really good. And then all I remember is at the end of the session, he's like, "Hey, thanks, man." Um, and I'm like, "Of course, man. You're welcome back anytime you like." He goes, "What do you think? How did it look?" And I go, "Kid, I think you have potential." And that's pretty much it. That's obviously he was no kid. He was already one of the top guys in the world, but I couldn't resist from saying that. And that's really all. That's about all I got.
Do you have any stories on Don Fry?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Oh man. I mean, they're all pretty off color. Don was a rampager in his. I'm kind of like sorting through to see what we can talk about.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was just thinking if you knew, for instance, the true story about that fight with the guy from Dog the Bounty Hunter
Oh,
there.
mm-mm, I didn't
I,
know.
I
I
was
heard
too
the same
afraid to
thing.
ask him.
I heard the same thing everybody else did. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't really shed on any light on that. I remember being in Vegas once for K1, and it was at, I think it was at the Bellagio, and all the fighters, we're there for the press conference, so all the fighters are waiting in one of the ballrooms off of the ballroom where the press conference is, and that's when Ken Shamrock and Tank Abbott were like feuding with one another, and they're in the same room, and I was friends with both of them, so I was able to put them together for a chat, and everything was cool. And before long, and this is a shameless name drop, but there's a reason for it. So around this one table, it was me and Tank and Shamrock and Coleman and Kerr and Fry, and the McCauley brothers were there. I remember that. Alan Goas, you may or may not remember. Marco Huas was there. I mean, it was like the who's who table of MMA at that point. And someone, Boss Rutan, Boss was important to this. Boss was there. Someone had the bright idea, probably Boss, going, hey, let's go to Olympic Gardens, which was like, and honestly, I don't want to say this to try to sound like I'm like trying to be a cool dude or something. The strip club thing was never my thing. Honest to God, I was found it a little weird to be honest. But I'm like, how can you pass up the opportunity to cruise with that group to Olympic Gardens, right? So, and I had my dog Ramon with me. My pit bull Ramon was with me. So Ramon went to Olympic Gardens with the whole crew, and everyone got lit up, of course. And what I remember, which was hysterical, is if you walk in, do you know that place I'm talking about, Devin?
No, I don't. I have never been.
It's massive. I mean, it's like the size of a small airline hangar. And they have, this is back in the day now. I don't know about now, but they have this large, large crew of giant, jacked up bouncers that look like Chippendales refugees. And there were, I don't know how many of them working. And we walked in and you could see them all kind of like shrink to the walls. And they were nowhere in sight. And everyone got all liquored up. And the next thing you know, you look up and Alan Goes, who's a wild man in his time, and Boss Rutan and Don Fry are all up on stage dancing with the girls. And they're being fun about it. They're always polite, but still, you're not supposed to do that, right? And I go to the bathroom with my pit bull, of course, and we walk in the bathroom, and the bouncers are nowhere to be seen. Second, I walk in the bathroom, it's like four or five of the bouncers like descend on me, and they're like, "Hey, can you control your friends?" I'm like, "No," and like, "Good luck, guys. Go back to work." And that's about it. That's about all I can really tell about Don Fry. Although, at Boss Rutan's wedding, I did waylay an unsuspecting drunken Don Fry, and I put him up for the dreaded airplane spin at Boss Rutan's wedding, and I put him on his feet, and he fell on his ass. That's about all
Oh,
I got.
that's funny. I wish you had that on tape.
I
Would
have a
you ever
photo.
do?
I have a photo of it, but no video.
Would you ever do a UPW reunion show, or is that just too much work?
It's it's not only too much work. It's we were talking about this about 10 years ago. Myself and Todd Kennelly and Dave Marquez and a couple others were talking about it. And Josh Weltman. Um, at that, I'm sorry, Josh Waldrop. I always get my Josh W's, but Josh was one of my top office guys in the day and a good friend still. Josh Waldrop. We were talking about doing a reunion show, and we even like sketched it out. I think I even have it in a Word file somewhere still. But man, like sadly, tragically, half of the guys have passed now, um, and the ones that are still with us really wouldn't be able to work. I don't know what the show would be now, Devin. It's hard to even imagine.
If WWE funded it, it could be a hell of a show.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you probably would, well, if WWE funded it, because then obviously you'd have Cena on it. We probably could manage to pull Victoria out of retirement somehow, and we get the Miz on there, and we get
Find
Master.
hiding rights in the backwoods of Louisiana.
Yeah, yeah, Masters and Hennigan and Paul London are all here in LA. I mean, yeah, we could cast it, but I think we'd probably want to do it in more of a way of like telling stories, with on stage bits, not scripted, or not worked bits. I mean, but unscripted bits, and you probably could do something really cool with that. But it'd be a lot of work, and it'd be a lift work wise and financially both, and I'm not really ready to undertake either of those lifts at this point in time.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but with all the money WWE has, I actually think that would be a great documentary for them to do at some point for the network or something, or a
Well,
Netflix special.
does Paul Levesque listen to Hannibal? Do you know?
Who knows what he comes across, but there's definitely some agents that do here and there that I have confirmation on that.
What?
Someone's asking what's Tom Howard up to these days.
Sorry, what's that?
Someone's asking if Tom Howard's still around.
Tom is alive. I'm happy to say alive and well and healthy and living in Las Vegas with his wife, Teresa, aka Zoe Stark. Um, they're building a home together. It's going to be ready to move in any day now. Um, Tom's gotten himself back in great shape. Uh, he's evolving in what he wants to do still. Devin, I think we're always in the process of growing up, especially those of us who chose this weird industry. It's not like we went to college and graduated and became an accountant, which we do for 40 years. So Tom's finding new directions now, but he's happy, he's healthy, he's got a great marriage. He travels, he's on the road with Zoe almost everywhere she goes, and just living his life.
And he's got to be a good 20 years older than her, right?
I think about that, yeah,
Yeah.
roughly.
He's done well for himself.
Yeah, they're both good people, I like seeing them together because, while on its surface, while people might say, "Oh, there's a 20-year age difference there. What's this?" But they're really, really solid together. And it's nice to
Yeah.
see that, whether they're friends from business or in any walk of life.
And what a great advisor. And I'm sure there's no doubt her success, he's partly behind it.
100%. Yeah, and she would be the first to say that. And I remember when she was coming up and she got signed to development, we would be on the phone a lot, the three of us, talking through what she had done and looking at video and all that. And I didn't contribute much. They would ask every now and then, and I would offer whatever I could offer. But I could see that Tom was really spending a lot of time and energy and wisdom guiding her through. And yeah, she would, I know, be the first to credit him for that.
Of all your life of highs and lows, you've lived a pretty amazing life. Is there any moment you could relive if you could choose one moment to go back and live again?
Yeah. Well, the low, I've had a lot. They're pretty extreme lows. I don't know if you. I think you know this. I had brain cancer last year, and three times in my. Well, it wasn't last year. It was the year before last. Through the early part of last year. Okay, not that that matters. Um, and at the end of that, I came out of it in remission and then got like deathly ill from the radiation poisoning. And a lot of like major systems, like my neurological system, started to fail. I couldn't hold these probably without like dropping one of them and breaking it. That was the least of it. And it got so bad. I had a stent put in. It was another thing that was going on, cardiopulmonary, and I'm great now. But I was given a 2 month survival prognosis. So I've had three of those. I've had three like life sentences now, where I was told in my first illness I had 6 months, and my second 2 months, and my last one 2 months. Um, and the during the lowest point of one, I had two dogs, Ramon and Marley, and I was like so in my mind down on my luck. That was like all that I had on planet Earth, and they I had to board them for a weekend while I was looking for a new place to live. The boarding facility let them escape, and I raced over to local animal control right when they brought Marley in, and he had been run over and crushed on the road, and they pulled his body out of a body bag. That was probably amongst a lifetime, like a lot of low moments. That was probably the very lowest. And at that same time, his brother Ramon went missing. And Devin, I spent the next 3 months living in the back seat of my car. I had the animal control officer show me where she found Marley's body. And I went and parked my car there. It was in a dirt road in a little town in California called Wildemar. And I lived in the back seat of my car. And all I did, I was obsessed. I was out on my mind. I looked for Ramon for 3 solid months. And I finally came to my senses a little bit. Went back to LA, crashed at my buddy's place for a while, started to get my stuff back together to a degree, got a job. And the day before I went to start that job, the phone rang, and it was animal control that had found Marley's body. And they called me to tell me that they had picked Ramon up off the road alive and well. So Ramon was returned to me. So although this might like a weird story for your highest moment in life, that would probably be my best one was when I got back to that place in Wildemar and saw him in the kennel there.
I can imagine. Great story. And I understand as someone that never had kids as well, how close you can be with an animal as I am with my dog. There was an event that you're attending WrestleMania weekend you wanted me to bring up with the Little People Wrestling, Billy Blade.
Yeah. Yeah, Billy Blades, one of my former students. He now has a promotion called Micromania. It's all the little folks. As you know, like in my time on stage in pro wrestling, I took so much little person heat. I'm all 5'4" on a tall day, and I got so much shit about that being in a world of big guys for so long that I actually love playing on that. If anybody ever throws a short joke at me, I've got five better ones to come back with. So I've always, been cool with that. And I've, said for years now, if there were, I have two dream matches left in my lifetime. One of them, I think you know one of them, Devin, would be a shoot with your good friend of mine, Jim Cornette.
Yeah,
But we know that one ain't happening anytime soon. And Cornette, look, I want to do nothing but get along with everybody these days and not throw any negativity to anybody except for Jim Cornette. So Jim, if you're listening, quit being such a pussy and let's get to it already. There we go, Devin. We could read
there you
read it.
go.
No,
Yeah,
right?
you gotta stay on it, and just for the fans in the LA area, which I know we have a lot. Rick and I might be doing something ourselves in the ring
Well, we
in
are
the
doing something in April, not in LA, in Orange County, right next door, in Irvine, at United Wrestling Network, and yeah, we got a little surprise coming for everybody, but it won't be a surprise because I know we'll announce it and start promoting it soon, and that's gonna be fun, Devin. It's gonna be really cool. I look forward to it. Um,
Definitely.
so
We're
the
going to
other
be
match I've
shaking
always
things
wanted to,
up there for the first time since the UPW days.
yeah, yeah, God, it's been a minute, that's for sure. But before that, as you mentioned, I am actually getting back in the ring to do my other dream match, and I've always wanted to be the giant in an all little guy battle royal. And I swear to God, I'm not making this up. I've always wanted to do it. It's just I thought it would be fun. And my former student and always friend Billy Blade, who now owns and runs the ultra successful Micromania, is allowing me to do that in Vegas on April the 20th at Micro Square Garden, Billy's venue in Las Vegas. So, it's going to be fun, I think, until those little guys kill me. But the reason it's like a big deal for me, really more than anything, it was that last like life sentence, as I called it, that I was given. That was just that was 5 months ago, man, 6 months ago, and I thought I was all but done. And I've not been in great shape or passably good shape physically since like 2011 when my spine started going awry. And after four major spine surgeries and all the infections that came with it, and then the three shoulder surgeries, I never did a single minute of rehab. And that's on me. That's just me being irresponsible. And I've now like taken to rehab like an addict. Um, I'm doing so much stuff physically, and I actually, Devin, I'm upright. I'm back to my full 5'4", and God knows I need every inch. So, um, I'm back in shape, and I'm just like, I got a long ways to go. I'm by no means there, but I'm making progress every day, and I just mentally feel good about my physical shape for the first time in 15 years. So the idea of getting in a ring to me would not have been possible last year at this time, and now it's just like something I'm really looking forward to. So that to me is the biggest distinction of getting to do this.
How's Butterbean's health holding up? And the last time I think you were on here with him, he was talking about wanting to fight Jake Paul. Is he getting back into boxing? What's going on with him?
Yeah, wanting to fight who? Sorry.
Jake Paul, I think
Oh,
you had
Jake
him
Paul.
on Talking
Yeah,
Tough.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was like a year ago, so I haven't
yeah.
heard of him fighting
All right.
between then and now. So what's he been up
Yeah,
to?
Bean is doing great. You mentioned like autographs before. He's made a real second career out of the Comic Cons and the various shows. He's on the road almost every weekend now. Um, but the thing that's interesting is if you caught Bean at one of these shows 3 years ago, you would have run into a 515-pound guy in a wheelchair who is totally depressed, and now you're going to see a 285-pound guy who is like walking and running all over the place that like really could not be happier in a better mood. And largely thanks to Diamond Dallas Page, of course, who oversaw Bean's rehab. um, he's doing great. He's in super good spirits all the time. I mean, like all the time, and I know him well. So it's never an act with him. He's just happy. And Bean actually is getting back in the ring also WrestleMania week. Um, 3 nights before me, he'll be over at the Palms working the WrestleCon main event against Minoru Suzuki, which should be really interesting.
Very interesting. Well, I see you keep looking over there. I don't know if you were serious or not earlier, but before we go, did you want to give us the tour of your place or were you just joking?
No, I was joking, but what I'm doing right now is I'm looking around my yard. I was looking at my girl pit bull Eos, who was doing something I wasn't sure she was doing. Um, no, but anyway, here in the backyard, I'll show you a couple of my dogs real quick though. There's Snoopy. There's not much to see. There's Moose over there. Everyone's just lounging around. There's my girl Eos. There's Yogi. Pretty exciting, huh, Hannibal? Bunch of pit bulls lying around. But
That's a full-time job looking after them.
it's easy actually. It's become so easy for me. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I really appreciate you catching up with us. I hope we can see you back on here more often, maybe doing some of your interviews because we always hear people wondering where Talking Tough went to, but you're extremely busy. But I know that you're going to do an interview before your big autograph session where you're going to try and round up as many of these guys as possible for a live interview that will go on Rick Bassman's YouTube channel, which, by the way, guys, search it up if you're watching this on the Hannibal TV and subscribe because he does get money from that now, too. He just needs to make content
Do I
to
really? I
collect
didn't even
it.
know about that. One of these days,
I,
you'll have to show me how that works, man.
yeah. Well, I think it might be in the pennies,
Ah,
but
all right. Well, there we go.
we
I can buy a biscuit for Wilson. That's great.
there we go. But it'd be great to actually. Well, you know what? Follow these guys around with your camera for WrestleMania weekend. You'll have 1 million subscribers in no time.
Yeah, actually, it might be worth doing something with that for sure. And as far as these guys and an interview goes, yeah, Devin, we're gonna be hitting you up to get. I'm not gonna try to get these guys together. We are gonna get all six of them on the same interview with you, and let's make it happen before WrestleCon for sure.
Excellent, sir. Well, I always love talking to you. You're one of the people I trust the most in wrestling. I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans and let them know where they can follow you.
No, appreciate that. I'm not big on social, but my main platform, I suppose, is Instagram. It's Rick_Bassman, Bassman. I wanna end this in a really super goofy way, and say what I oftentimes said on Talking Tough, where people who were finding themselves in challenging places and didn't know like what they could do to like feel better for a minute, I'd always give the same advice, and I think it works no matter what. Not that you were asking for it, but we were talking before about my vantage point, at least, about how the world could be a nicer place, but just with a little bit of effort. So if I ever find myself needing a lift, I tell myself before I leave the house that, and this is my advice to everybody out there who's not asking for my advice one way or the other, is that the first 5 people you run into today, tomorrow, whenever it is, just be like really genuinely nice to them. Not overly effusive or silly. Just be nice. Open a door for somebody. be helpful, be complimentary in a genuine way. You may not always get the reaction you want because, we don't know what the person we're addressing is going through. But if you can do that 5 times in a row, you're going to lift at least one person, and you'll see that, and you're going to lift yourself in the process, and you want to keep doing it. So that's what I always like to end with.